You are listening to Data Decoded, a podcast from the Data Justice Hub at Concordia University.
We are a collaborative project aiming to understand how activists gather and make sense of data.
Want to learn how activists are using data to fight evictions and how to use data to push universities to stop investing in fossil fuels?
In this new series, we find out what drives activists and how they use data to further their cause. We find out how data activists work to make the world a fairer place.
To listen to their stories and more, tune in to Data Decoded, wherever you get your podcasts. For this episode, we are speaking with Jason Scott. Jason is an American archivist and historian, but is famously the official mascot for Archives Team. The aforementioned group, Archives Team, is an assemblage of professional and amateur archivists who find and catalog websites for the purpose of historical preservation.
Hello, generations beyond.
So, yeah.
And I realized that there had been no real historical combination of like presentation and context for these bulletin boards. So I made a site called textfiles.com, and I put up as many of my files, and I did a whole bunch of, descriptions of what were the files. I wrote essays around the files. That caused people to find it. They gave me their text files. Suddenly the site's growing. Suddenly I discover that not everything was expressed in a text file. What about GIF files? What about music? What about recordings of people doing phone conferences? And so I started expanding the site. And so people would give me things when they were getting rid of them, or provide me with copies of things where they didn't know where it would go. And because I, kind of come from a loose background, I'm not really beholden to oh, geez, what'll happen if I put this up? Will I get in trouble? I am fundamentally genetically defined as fuck around and find out.
Jason's work is dedicated to access of information and providing a resource for the variety of communities online. His work is widespread and expansive, what some might see as overly complicated. But there is a method to his madness.
I love just putting things out there, doing experiments, and a couple letters come in. Maybe some people get angry, and I address that, as opposed to constantly wishing for the day that I die so I can be happy that I didn't make a fuss. These text files had bulletin board system phone numbers in them. And I realized that, wow, if you kind of cross-correlate all these files, I bet you could make a master list of every bulletin board system there ever was, because those phone numbers are static. So I hacked together what at the time was like a 50,000 BBS list. Now it's like 130,000. And included any data I could scrape, what years it was proven to have existed, and who ran it, and what software did it run over the years, and what town. And what I didn't know at the time was I therefore set up a massive honeypot for people who had lived through that time to search for their name or the name of people they missed, or to search for bulletin board systems that they had been part of or ran, and find this pantheon listing every board in their area code. And so I started writing about places that I saw that there was potential for loss of more data, that websites that had been communities that had been up in the 1990s were now being shut down as they were being acquired or the sites were going down. But finally, I was like, we ought to have a team of people who come out and make copies of this as best as they can and coordinate against all of these things. It should be an A team, an archive team. And a couple people came and said, I think we could do this.
Archives Team has been active since 2009, and their work continues to grow. Their Warrior Tracker system, condensed of independent workers who have taken the time to preserve internet history, has tackled a mountain of content.
But after about 8 months, we got a relatively good GeoCities mirror It was very successful, and more people liked the value proposition of what archive team was. So that's where my skills working with volunteers and activists kind of first started showing itself, like understanding the mindset of frustration and wanting to act and being given, people are coming in and leaving all the time, something tickles their concern and fancy, and then they leave. Other people have been with the archive team for 15 years because it's continued to be an interest to them. We've had people who were with it for a long time and just literally retired. Just literally was like, I don't want to run with these dogs anymore. This is just, I got other things to do in life. But also is like surrounded by these volunteers who see this clear and present mission. And so the archive team persists because, unfortunately, the mission that led to it and the frustrations that caused people to try to find a solution have simply not gone away in any way at all. The archive team, of course, persists literally daily. I can wander in there and see dozens of kids knocking each other around. In one of my talks, I said the three attributes of an archive team member is kleptomania, paranoia, and rage, because there's a constant worry that everything is not permanent. Everything's on shifting sands. A willingness to get angry about it and take action, and then a willingness to not ask questions. Initially, what you're talking about is website announces it is going down. Try to grab copy of website via best practices, which these days is the web archive format. Grab until they scream at you, then grab harder. When they block you, get around the block. When people hear about it, explain to them what you're doing, and then make it available as best you can after the site came down. So people would say, well, if you guys like saving things, why don't you save this? People would say, oh, since you believe in making the past persist or preserving aspects of online life, surely you want to do blank. And blank, if it's low resource or low cost, somebody on archive team can be convinced to do it. But sometimes it's so, aggressively aspirational. We have to say, well, we're not your guys, but, thanks for wanting to do it with us. Maybe we can help you find somebody who will help you. Or one of the archive team members will, because of course it's a loose collective, will leaf off and say, oh, okay, you know what? I'll help you, man. I'll make this thing happen. That's cool. I'll do it. And then you have suddenly this weird, splinter group essentially. So the IRC channel for the archive team has archive team dash BS, and then archive team dash OT. So BS is, okay, go ahead, bike shed all you want to about the topic. And then archive team dash OT is like, you're just a bunch of people who like archive team, and the conversation you're having has nothing to do with archive team. We will see sometimes projects where it'll turn out that it's like, you can find this project, and if you track it down, the person is an archive team member or alumnus, but archive team isn't doing the project. They're writing a code or they're doing a site, and it'll be like, yeah, I used to go to archive team, which means it has about as much meaning as, say, MIT student to I'm doing rocket engineering. And it's like, yeah, I brought in a couple of my old MIT buddies, and they're helping me, but it's not an MIT project. The archive, the web initially was very well made for being duplicated. It was static. It was repeatable. It was designed to be resilient in the face of shifting change. And then they ruined it and made it designed to be more of like a lightweight application and a client server model where stuff is being locked up inside of a black box, and the black box is feeding out manipulated strings in return for requests instead of giving you all of the strings and letting you locally do the work. So at the beginning of Archive Team, you know, when we were going after sites that had been online for 10 or 15 years at that point, they weren't designed to be archived, but they ended up being well designed to be archived because they were static, they were procedural, users would be assigned numbers, profiles would have dependable letters and strings to represent their subsets. The web archive format is just a little better defined for playback in terms of it tracks dates of grabbing and interrelation and dovetails with other copies of itself that enable you to, be able to do like 15 grabs across 10 years. So the web archive format turns out like visible light versus infrared light to just be a better version of archiving files, just that it's a little better designed from the ground up to perceive a world where you are looking at a series of static files that will shift imperceptibly over time, and you just need to account for that. That's all. Because one of the first things we ran into with the archive team was that we were generating a lot of disk space. We were just generating a lot of data because you grab a full, site or a full area, and yeah, of course, it's going to start to be like 5 gigabytes, 50 gigabytes, 100 gigabytes, and now what are you doing? So like the pure technical weight of how do we ensure we don't take up much space? How do we ensure that we can maybe have the bandwidth to be able to grab what we're now turning into 1 to 5 to 10 to 50 terabyte data sets? How do we share that? How do we keep it sanctified, even if we're asking anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 clients to be attacking the surface of this location? I came up with what became ArchiveBot to fix a problem, which was ArchiveBot solved the problem of not every archiving job was an epic archaeological dig. Sometimes it was just, dude ran a website that was like, pretty good website about, radio repair, and then he died. And word had gotten out he died. And his website was maybe a couple hundred pages. You're not going to, launch a SWAT team of 70 guys to descend on a 100-page item. It's going to be one guy. But then that one guy better be doing it right. Like, how is he going to do it right? Like, if you let him alone, and maybe he'll do it wrong. Maybe he'll grab it wrong. So why not make an automated bot that, when directed in a location, does that job, that relatively small job? So it's like, ArchiveBot, grab this guy's website. It puts it into a queue. It grabs it according to the processes that we know work. It retries. It does the logs. It creates the WARC files. It uploads the WARC files to the Internet Archive. It logs that it grabbed it. Somebody comes along and goes, ArchiveBot, grab this. It goes, all set, man. I grabbed it already. It's all set. Given that power, some people, of course, not intentionally, abuse it. If you have a magic wand that can suck the internet up like a vacuum, they'll be like, well, we just have to get a copy of every one of this thing. We never know when it will go down. And okay, that's fine. And of course, there are things that confound ArchiveBot. Like you'll run it against the site and suddenly you'll start to notice like, something's going wrong. It's stuck in a loop. It's doing weird things. So they're constantly having to fix the code behind ArchiveBot to handle these aggressive contingencies. You can always tell there's some people who come in to an organization that's been around for 12 years. And you have two possibilities. You have ossification of that group. So they, not to hijack on a track, but you've been a feminist group for 15, 20 years, you've gotten a lot done, and suddenly you're finding yourself faced by a new generation asking, what are your positions on trans rights? Now, that organization may say, well, we've built up such rules, we know how to handle a new subject matter, so we're going to use those built up processes. Or they'll just cave, they'll just collapse, they'll just be like, well, that's not, we never lived in a world where this was a thing, right? Like, oh no, just like Archive Team didn't quite live in a world where people would go, I don't want to be archived, or please never have this, or whatever. It's incumbent on an older organization of like, how is it going to handle that? So we have people who come in and clearly try to just seize the means of production. They just want, they see a new vision for Archive Team, and they try to push it in. And the Archive Team generally is hostile to that. There was a schism 15 years ago, actually. There's a second group, because what happened is that group was archiving image boards, specifically 4chan, 8chan, and a couple others. And I, in a rare show of power, was like, no, go to hell. We're not going to do that, because it is a machine designed to create offensive material and iterates itself to become more and more offensive, and its power rests in its ephemerality. So by grabbing it through the Archive Team channels, we are rewarding the offensiveness while punishing the ephemerality, and we are taking on all of the liability that they aren't. And other people were like, no, Jason, that is a betrayal of the ethics of Archive Team and what it's for. And I went, well, guess who's fucking in charge? That group rose because they saw that there was a world where image boards could be archived and they could engineer for it. And we didn't under my tutelage. And in the years hence, Bibanon has written their own utilities, their own approaches. And of course, there are people who happily jump between the two groups. There are people who are happy to, I'm sure Archive Team in some way uses some of the utilities and innovations that Bibanon has done. Obviously, Bibanon uses Archive Team materials and makes their own versions of them because they're open source. And that was a schism where fundamentally there was a disagreement on that core issue. We'll also have cases where when Justin TV was going under, that was 1.2 petabytes of data. And I was like, well, that's too big. We can't grab it. And there were people who were like, well, of course you can grab it. You're Archive Team. We are Archive Team. We can do this. And I'm like, no, you really can't. And I had an insider at Justin TV. This was before it became Twitch TV. And I said, yeah, dude, how much data are we talking? He was like, oh, 1.2 petabytes. And I'm like, well, tell me this then. How many of these videos have had more than 1,000 views? How many have had more than 100? And how many have had more than 10? And he's like, I can do better than that. I can tell you half of them have 0 views. And I can tell you that like 300, it was like 300 gigabytes were more than 100 views, and like 30 gigabytes was more than, or no, 300 gigabytes was more than 10, 30 was more than 100. And I was like, oh, we can definitely do those numbers. We can do the most popular ones. But there were definitely people, I have a very strong memory of like how furious and betrayed some people felt, because they were like, Archive Team never says no to data. We are the sanctuary for all created online data. And I was like, no, we are not. We are not. We should be grabbing items that provide later generations with the context to understand our culture and our history. But we are not the chronicler of all known flippings of bits on all equipment going back all of time. We are not a replay machine of the entirety of electricity flow of the human race. The archive team has done thousands of jobs, thousands, ranging from many, many hundreds of terabytes down to the 100+ archive bot grabs that will happen this week or this day. So, we've had it all cases. I've had CEOs screaming at me on the phone. I have had legal threats, trying to get me arrested for downloading without a license. I've had people who have tried to portray us as, misguided hackers. And then I've had people who are like, oh shit, we wondered when you were going to show up, just that total like, oh no, here they are. Hi, archive team. So the way that archive team will now, in the modern era, attack a site, what we do instead is we analyze the site, and we say to ourselves, are we lucky? Do they have consecutive numbers for accounts, or do they have URLs that are generated according to a key? We do a few test runs to go, are we grabbing all of the data? Like, we grab it, we look at the playback, and we go like, okay, this is working. This is grabbing these pieces. And then we turn it on for a little while to see if something implodes. And then if nothing implodes, then we add it to the archive team warrior. And now suddenly anywhere between 500 and 3,000 machines are downloading from the site at full speed. And then we go until there's no more jobs to get. Now, and that's just like kind of like what we've learned over time. Now, obviously that changes. Sometimes people tattle to me and say like, the place is going down in 48 hours. And then there's no, just gotta grab as much crap as you can, as badly as you can, because just to have a record that it existed. Ideally, we get told, 90 days, 120 days, we can make an intelligent decision. We can also decide if it's worth it. So making those kind of value judgments can sometimes happen, where we're just like, oh, I know you think this is special. It's not. It's not. We know it's something else. Nobody wants to waste disk space. Nobody wants to generate terabytes and petabytes of data, because it just becomes harder to negotiate its value later. That's kind of like caked into the whole thing, is just understanding that like, it's not always good. Maybe sometimes you just go, we already got this actually. I like it when there is a sense that the experience is fun, and that it's done out of a sense of doing the right thing, while also not throwing, good people under the bus. People who are just trying to do their job, and they did not expect, they are scared for it's a struggle for them just to like know that like in 30 to 60 days the entire team is going to be laid off, and that they're going to like have to find new work, and the severance may not come, and paychecks may not clear, and then there's this team outside screaming about them, making fun of them. And so we try to be empathetic to those folks. We don't blame those folks. We always try to draw it to, no, this is because there is no restriction, no legal restriction to the plowing under of communities and user generated content in the pursuit of the dollar. And and companies to which there is no, unless you're fined for not taking out the garbage, you will not take out the garbage. As a company, it's too expensive. So you have to fine them for not taking out the garbage. And there's no fine for just plowing under all of this user generated content and saying, wasn't that a great 10 years? Thank you, on our wonderful journey, and off to their next thing. And that's it. So as a result, that's the experience we're in. So like, kind of cooked into the archive team story is that we talk about like, these should be hosting, the law around hosting user generated content should be not unlike the rules around being a landlord. that there's rules of notification, retrieval, access, appeal that should exist. And it's not going to come from the companies. No fucking way. They're never going to do it. Why would they? Any more than a landlord would love to have a 60-day delay on any time they want to get rid of somebody. They don't want that. They want to give you a note. Get out of here. Get out Friday. I'm going to have new people move in Monday. They don't want that. And they'll bitch endlessly about it. But on the other hand, they all know, well, at least I know the guy down the street can't rent people on a different basis. So I'm not the only guy. It's everybody. So, I mean, for 10 years now, I've been like, yeah, there should just be laws. There should just be laws. And if you get rid of data, you have to like make it available through some crappy third-party service that charges $50 to get a USB stick or a CD-ROM mailed to you with your user data. And it's terrible and crappy, but it's there, and it's there everywhere. And that'll be just fine. Yeah, so ArchiveBot removes a lot of the issues and conflict with should we do this or should we not. There are a pretty high bar for will this require the efforts of archive team. ArchiveBot does so much, you know what I mean? Like, it's like we have a paint gun to paint things, and only every once in a while do we need to bring in a muralist. Like 99% of the time, ArchiveBot's just going to do the job. So we were able to automate out a large percentage of what would have been volunteer, debilitating jobs that just ate all the energy of the room. So when we do these big jobs, we'll have maybe 2 or 3 going at once, but maybe we're going to do 30 or 20 a year at most, maybe less in some years. So you don't have a lot you have to gear up. And generally, the wiki helps as a source of lore. The side effect is that there's pretty slavishly implemented documentation top to bottom in the wiki. You can see, oh, here's the job. Here's how it was thought of. Here's what they thought they were going to find on it. Here was the methodology for grabbing it. Here's how much was grabbed. Here's the location at the Internet Archive that has a copy, or here's the other location which has the copy. Here's why it failed. Here's why we couldn't do it. Here's why we only have a percentage of it. So nobody gets to say like, well, it never worked out. I don't know why, man. It just didn't work out. You go like, no, here's why. They were issuing blocking on American IP addresses. And so we just couldn't use any of our IPs that we had access to for certain kinds of bots and so on. And so you have like a full logbook built into the archive team. If you go look at the archive team wiki, you'll see it's extraordinarily active. Like it just has a lot of updates. And then there's like a board on the front and it says current big projects. And then there'll be one, it's called like alive or are they, dying, dead. And you can see where people are dropping notes of like, well, even though, you know, the furry erotica archive, story archive is up, there's been no update to the site for a year. That's weird. That's suspicious. Maybe someone should find out what's going on. But then if somebody posts news, they'll be like, oh, okay, they're just lazy. They didn't do a post. Then other times it's like, oh, there's rumors going around of a buyout of this thing. Here's a link to the article about a buyout. Maybe we want to think about proactively grabbing it before it's bought out so they don't delete it. Then other times it's like, oh, we missed this one. Just couldn't grab it. It was too obscure, too fast, whatever. Here's why it failed. So there's like documentation of like how you can lose access to a given thing. Unknowingly, really, find yourself failing to achieve something because of, you know, technical or political considerations outside the realm of archive teams. Couldn't do it, man. Couldn't grab it.
Raz on the track beat.
I would rather leave 1,000 alumnus of what was archive team because it's not needed than have an ongoing group of 50 to 100 bitter people constantly slaving away trying to make archive team work in a world that has made it almost impossible for archive team to work. We can't archive Signal conversations. We can't really archive Twitter beyond specific tweets. We really can't archive Twitch streamers to the level of whatever with any clear benefit. And building insane infrastructure and resources to try to attempt to do so would just burn us out. So a lot of it is just kind of being at the ready, keeping an eye on things, maintaining the wiki, watching the internet, trying to find communities that perhaps have been functioning so far in the background that there's a danger that their demise will go unnoticed, and trying to notice them. And I hope it dies. I hope the organization dies. I hope we get to a point that there's just fundamental, no longer, it's fun and heroic to be the spare tire for free group that shows up late at night and gives you your free spare tire because you're stranded. But I'd rather we design the cars so that they can run on a flat long enough to get to somewhere. I'd rather we have that cooked into the whole process. I hope all the cars have tubeless tires that just get them home, as opposed to having to run this heroic, fun Indiana Jones swoop in through the window, grab all the crap, giggle, and leave a archive team card on the way out. Life's a little short to constantly be the missing piece in an ill-maintained process. So that's my take.
Despite the many challenges that persist in their work, their wiki expands and preserves some of the most interesting content online today. Currently, their biggest project is archiving Google+, which they began doing in 2019. To keep up to date with Jason and Archive Team's work, visit their website at wiki.archiveteam.org. Jason Scott is also active on Twitter and can be followed at TextFiles.